Hello, everyone. I am super proud to have two good friends and very accomplished entrepreneurs themselves to speak about this topic around entrepreneurship. Besides being amazing entrepreneurs themselves, both of these people have been working in the field of enabling entrepreneurs for a long while. So, in this conversation, I'm hoping that we can distill a lot of their learnings from experiences that they may have had, as well as experiences they may have had in enabling other entrepreneurs. Uh, Proud to introduce to you Daniel Isenberg. Dan, Dan is the CEO of Entrepreneurship Policy Advisors and a professor at Babson and Columbia Business School. Also super excited to introduce to you Bhairavi Jani, our other panelist. Bhairavi is the chairman and founder of IEF Entrepreneurship Foundation and the executive director of the SCA Group. Welcome, Bhairavi. Welcome, Dan.
Hi.
To start the conversation, I'd maybe want to start off with just a, one quick anecdote from your end around in your entrepreneurship experience. What did you think was the most important aspect uh, from journeys that you took? Uh,
There's quite a few, but I uh, certainly think that perseverance is one of the big takeaways for me. And anybody who wants to embark on the journey of entrepreneurship should be ready for some very tough times. I think this has been illustrated in the last 6 months with the pandemic, but for entrepreneurs, the pandemic is just a more extreme version of normal. Uh, the because this is just the nature of entrepreneurship. You're in markets or you're in a product market fit, which has never been established quite the same way before. So there's always a lot of uncertainty and a lot of ups and downs. So persevering through those is, of course, one. I think a second is and this is related, the ability to sell an idea and a product that embodies that idea. Because again, in most cases in entrepreneurship, you're doing something that is in some way new, and uh, and you have to learn how to sell that. It may be that ultimately there's a good product market fit, but at the beginning there isn't, or at least it's not perceived. And so you've got to learn how to get those initial sales and build momentum. Selling at the beginning and selling in the middle are completely different. When you have a reputation and you have a name in the marketplace, it's not that it's easy to sell, but it's different to sell. So I think the second takeaway has to do with learning how to sell and learning how to present ideas that are maybe not fully formed. The third, for me, takeaway, and this is very personal, and this is the ability to work with other people. And this has been the hardest for me because it's not my natural tendency. I was trained more as a scientist and a loner, but learning how to work with other people and learning how to get people on board who are better than you and in some way, really better than you in some way, not just to sound nice, but people who you learn have expertise, knowledge, or viewpoints. I can expound on those, but those sort of off the cuff are three of the most important lessons I've learned.
oh, fantastic, Dan. Thank you for getting us started. What are the kind of places you have enabled entrepreneurial ecosystems in? And then let's get into specifics of what are the most important elements in amplifying growth and vibrancy and robustness of an entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Well, I started off in Israel, in my entrepreneurial career, I should say, in Israel. And and I sort of had some impact on the ecosystem there, but more importantly, I had a front row seat and was very intimately involved in the emergence of entrepreneurship as a societal phenomenon in Israel. And so I saw this in process over a period of, let's say, roughly 20, 25 years. The reality, of course, in my view, is very different from the stories. about that you're told in Startup Nation is a nice fairy tale about reality that is more complex and a little different from the way they presented. But I did learn about and felt with my own skin what does it feel like when an ecosystem develops and the cultural and structural changes that are involved. And that learning became very important for me. I didn't realize it at the time. After I then went back and did my graduate training and was teaching for a while, and then became involved explicitly in fostering entrepreneurship. We've worked now in quite a few areas around the world, including Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, Panama, the United States, especially central United States. It's called the Midwest around Milwaukee and around Cleveland, and in Eastern Canada. It's called Atlantic Canada. So those are we also did a project a long time ago in Saudi Arabia. It was a pilot project. We did a project in Puerto Rico, also a pilot project to learn what we were doing. So these are some of the areas that I personally have been deeply involved in. I advised the White House also in Startup America, although I have to confess they didn't listen to my advice. But they did asking for it and they did hear it. I can explain uh, why that's important to me.
Okay, so Dan, I want you to speak about like what have you learned from your experiences in all of these places in enabling ecosystems. But let's get Bhairavi also into hear her expanse of work and hear her context of work in terms of where all has she one worked as an entrepreneur and then enabled entrepreneurship in various parts of India.
I had front row seats to entrepreneur transformations from childhood. I spent my weekends at airports, at ports, loading vehicles, learning how to count, containers and packages and what have you. I mean, I remember when I was in sixth grade, I learned how to, have every single pin code that my father's company, Blue Dart, was delivering, in my head. And I knew this airport codes and a language that most 12-year-olds would not know. So it was fairly early. And then when I became an entrepreneur myself at the age of 21, my father decided not to support in the sense that he wanted really for me to have an experience of a first generation entrepreneur, right? I'm fourth generation. My great grandfather started our business. So he gave me a 50 square feet office, took exorbitant rent for it. I mean, now if I were to go and negotiate that, I would not pay 1/10 of that money. But I was just back from America. I had no clue what were the prevalent rents. Locked up that office once when I couldn't pay him the rent by the 5th of the month. It was this narrow little alley, like a pantry, right? And it had an air condition that he said, because it was air conditioned, he was charging me more rent, which didn't turn out to be working. And then when I told him that, look, it's not working, he said, well, now you took the office, so it's your problem. He took 50 paisa for every photocopy I took in his office and in advance, because he said you were a fly-by-night operator. And basically called up all the banks and said, don't give her money. I don't stand guarantee. I was like, I'm not even asking money from anyone. I was very lucky. I had my first customer as Lego. I was only 21. My first warehouse was 620 square feet. It had no toilets. And so I would basically ask the neighboring truckers to park their two trucks in a row so that I could go to bathroom. That was my beginning. My first employee was an 8th grade fail who basically discontinued education at 8th grade, laborer from UP called Shamlal, and he taught me everything I had to know, I have to say. And so that was my journey. So I don't think anything can replace the joy, the fun, the pain, the anxiety, the excitement of a first generation, first startup, right? Even serial entrepreneurs will, oh my like yourself would know that what you learn the first time is like, it's like being on the first date. And so that was my experience of being an entrepreneur without resources. And so when we set up IEF a couple of years ago, the idea was to go to small scale entrepreneurs who do not get access to sit in front of the venture capitalists, entrepreneurs who operate in difficult terrains like Jammu Kashmir, northeast of India, difficult logistics, difficult markets, very little access to finance, and actually see how we can really build work together, not just as an ecosystem, of course, but one has to also realize, and all entrepreneurs have to realize, that they are the most important part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I mean, if they are not sorted, nothing sorted. Not the company, not the industry, not the ecosystem. And so we decided to start work. Our first class was in Shillong, Meghalaya, where we sat down with a group of entrepreneurs um, to really talk about why they were entrepreneurs in the first place, and then sort of looking at skill sets that would help them go ahead and build their ventures and scale their ventures. And so we've pretty much
Yeah.
worked in almost all tier 3, tier 4 towns across India by now, thousands of entrepreneurs, and it's been a joyride. Like, I love it. I think entrepreneurship, no offense, but it's the best job in the world. And I love to have that with everyone, because the creative process of something that is an idea and a dream, and then it translates into a tangible venture with people, and transformation in the marketplace, transformation in lives of customers, of vendors, of employees. It's just an irreplaceable journey. And I think every human being should have an entrepreneurial journey, irrespective of their profession.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bhairavi. So we have two very diverse people who have very wide experiences with entrepreneurship. So I'm looking forward to an exciting conversation. So Dan, back to that question around what makes a good entrepreneurial ecosystem, what makes it vibrant, what enables growth of entrepreneurs in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and what makes it eventually robust.
Well, I don't know if I can answer all those questions at once, but I'll try to respond. Um, First of all, the ecosystem metaphor, why do we use it? Why is it important? And I believe the reason that it's important is that ecosystems are relatively self-organizing, self-regulating, uncontrolled systems of interaction. I think that's the power of the metaphor. The power is that they're self-sustaining and self-organizing to a large extent. And because of that, they're very inexpensive, because the different actors, whether it's a biological or an entrepreneurship or other ecosystem, the actors benefit from their actions, and others benefit from their actions as well. Of course, there's competition. So I just want to say that's the only academic comment I'll make. But I think we've lost that in the ecosystem metaphor, which I was one of the original people who applied it to entrepreneurship almost a dozen years ago. It's lost its power because it's being thought of much more like a farm, which is cultivated and invested in. Somebody owns it. It's controlled. It's regulated. So farms and ecosystems, just to be clear, are diametrically opposed. They're the opposite of each other. An ecosystem doesn't have an owner and doesn't have a controller, and that's what makes them powerful. So the question is, the first question is, as human beings, of course, we can have intention. We can go and look at a swamp, which is an ecosystem, and say, well, actually, I have some intention towards that ecosystem. I want to have recreation for people, or I want to have clean water, or I want it to contribute to fresh air, or whatever the reason is. And so we can say, what can we do? How can we impact that ecosystem to give it more water, more fresh air, more entertainment? But we have to be very careful in not tinkering with it too much, because what will happen is it'll lose the power or the property of its being self-containing and the parts interacting. So that's, I think, just as background, it's very important. So I think the most important thing as human beings trying to foster an environment, a culture, an ecosystem where entrepreneurship happens is to understand what's the purpose, what's our purpose, and to be aligned around that purpose. And that almost never happens. Because to say we're all aligned around entrepreneurship, the problem is entrepreneurship means different things for different people. So it means anything from micro enterprise to self employment to family business to innovation to disruption to social entrepreneurship to venture back to startups. It means all kinds of different things. And I recommend, I'll just say one more comment and then pause. In our work, we've come to the conclusion that the most useful unifying principle of entrepreneurship is growth. It's not start, and it's not innovation, whereas those things may be important. But the most important unifying goal or objective is more and more local firms, more and more actors in that ecosystem can grow more and more rapidly. And it's a dynamic that starts, it accelerates, and it continues in a self-regulated, relatively self-regulating and chaotic way. And because of that, there are many actors. And I agree that the entrepreneurs, of course, they're essential. But I think a lot of times we miss the non-entrepreneurs who are just as important. It's like a catalyst in a chemical reaction. You add a little chemical and it changes the entire reaction, even though the catalyst may be extremely minor. So a professor, a large company, a banker, a government official can be extraordinarily influential and catalytic in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, which again is a system of interacting parts so that more and more of them can grow. I'll stop there. I've obviously
Yeah.
a lot more to say about it.
Yeah. So
But growth,
Dan teaches this stuff, and he can go on. But I think the clarifying aspects of both what is an ecosystem and just the importance of growth, and local firms growing rapidly, more and more local firms growing more and more rapidly. That as the mantra, which I've heard from him multiple times, are powerful starting. Bhairavi, for tier one and tier two towns like Bangalore and Ludhiana, uh, and Bangalore obviously is known as the startup capital of the country. But not just, if you were to broaden the spectrum of entrepreneurs from just the technology startups to, as Dan says, local firms, right? Uh, what do you think are key ingredients or critical roles a program can play to not disrupt the ecosystem, to not mess with it too much, but at the same time, to put that intention and purpose in to drive that, to drive growth to happen more rapidly?
I'm going to break your question back into three different parts. First is this idea that ecosystems are different in smaller towns and bigger towns. I don't think so. I think ecosystem is an ecosystem. Its components will be standardized. Its form and shape may be different based on geography, culture, requirements, right? But every entrepreneur needs access to finance or access to markets and access to skill sets and a system where there is constant exchange of ideas and an open market, etc., right? So I think we have to accept first and foremost that there are certain standard components of every ecosystem. And as Dan said, many of them are naturally built, and many of them act as catalytic tool for the rest of the local economy as well, and sometimes even national economies in case of smaller countries like Singapore, for example. And so I think we have to be very careful in saying what would it work in Ludhiana or Bangalore. Of course, India is a very diverse country, right? So even what would work in a Bangalore may not work in Ludhiana, or what may work in a New Delhi may not work in a Chennai, because just the local cultural ingredients are different. Let me give you an example. When IEF was running a class and I was running that class in Srinagar a couple of years ago, and there was a stone pelting incident right on the street below. There were 5 rounds of CRPF going on, and two entrepreneurs had damaged cars when they went down, but they sat through the class, right? And so, for example, entrepreneurs in areas like that apart from other things, may need help in continuity and growth assistance that maybe entrepreneurs in Bangalore may not need. But entrepreneurs in Bangalore may need help with, for example, competition distinction, may need help with, how do you really cut down office time because commute is a problem. So I think we have to really broaden our view when we talk about that. And therefore, the point that why only technology? I mean, look, there have been entrepreneurs before. I mean, Rockefeller was an entrepreneur, and so was Henry Ford, and so was Walchand Hirachand, and they were. It depends what you call technology. For people who put out the steam engines in those ages, that was technology. I think we have to really be very clear about the fact that, as Dan said, at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is about solving a problem that you see. You want to change something. Who says that problem has to be solved only using software? Who says that problem has to be solved only doing by X thing or Y thing? And I think that's what makes entrepreneurship so special, because in the end what you're saying is, my aspirations to see a transformation in the marketplace are far greater than the resources that are at my disposal. And it's that transformation that is the process of entrepreneurship or enterprise building and growth, or you add different words to it. So I think, let me now answer the third part of your question, saying, what would it look different? Nothing. I mean, to say that a homemaker who delivers food to 20 people and that's her business won't need finance is being limited in how we look at entrepreneurship. At the same time, to say that a person who runs a 500 crore company does not need mentoring is also being limited, because maybe the kind of mentoring they need may be different, but they still need that support system. I think that's why ease of doing business is such a big thing, because it doesn't matter what size is your business, you need the ease of doing business, right? And an entrepreneurial ecosystem that is vibrant will have that ease of doing business available for all sizes and shapes of businesses, versus only for larger companies who can maneuver the system.
Got it. Got it. Thank you, Bhairavi. Um, Dan, you touched upon growth, and having worked with you, I know you talk about growth happening in very short periods of time for enterprises. I'd love for you to talk about how mid-sized enterprises that have been somewhat stagnating for a long time can go through a program and suddenly experience rapid growth. Is that even possible?
Yeah, so I want to make very clear a few terms. You use the word rapid growth, but I use the term more and more rapidly. Those are different. Rapid growth is some objective absolute number, 20, 30% or something like that. And I don't know how to define rapid growth, but I do know how to define more rapidly. Means if you're growing at 0, now you're growing at 2. And if you're growing at 2, you're growing at 2.5. And if you're growing at 2.5, you're growing at 6. And what's important is the trajectory, the acceleration. That's what's important. And that's what introduces the dynamism and what helps the ecosystem to form, because it has ripple effects throughout. That kind of growth has ripple effects. So the second comment, I want to come back to what Bhairavi said about solving a problem. I would go one step beyond that. It's solving a problem at a profit. It's fashionable to think about social entrepreneurship and other kinds of nonprofit entrepreneurship, but the concept of entrepreneurship was built around an economic activity that had to do with growth, with generating value, economic value for the people who took the risks. And so I don't want to ignore that. I don't think it's the same to have to run a business that you may own, in which you're not making money, and you basically sort of just and I don't make light of it, but you're just surviving, versus always looking for new growth opportunities and learning how to actualize those opportunities, whether or not, again, it's from 2 to 3 or from 300 to 500 or 500 to 5,000. That's not what's important. And so I think that growth, again, has to be at the core, at the center of entrepreneurship and the center of our dialogue around entrepreneurship. And if we do focus on that kind of growth, I think we can identify it, and I'll come back to say a word about that, and B, it can happen quickly. So rough rule of thumb is that, and this is true, approximately true around the world, of the existing stock of companies that already exist today, regardless of the size, roughly 20% of them could, with a little bit of support, a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of training, generate new real growth. And what I mean by growth is I mean growth in revenues. That's profitable, new customers, expanding capacity. For example, getting new warehouses, new distribution channels, new logistics, new people, bringing on board new contractors. That's building capacity, and also managing cash resources. So access to finance is an interesting thing. There are different ways of access to finance. One of the ways of accessing finance is improving your operations and learning how to manage your cash flow better so that you have more cash resources. That's often overlooked. So coming back to your question about rapidness. So it's showing quickly that small growth can happen. It's not showing quickly that something called rapid growth can happen. So, for example, you can show a business owner, let's not everybody, but let's say about 20% of them, you can show them that they can expand what they sell to customers and get a new contract with the same customer, or instead of selling just A to customer, selling B and C to the same customer, or instead of just selling A plus 15% of A, or even just, for example, raising your prices, something that entrepreneurs are deathly afraid to do because they think they'll lose the market. Learning how to raise your prices. You raise your prices by 5%, boom, you have 5% higher revenues, and it's all profit, almost all profit. So these are the things that can very quickly generate small amounts of growth. And that creates a new trajectory. What's important, again, is the dynamic, the trajectory towards growth. That's what's important.
Okay, thanks, Dan. If you were to get 20 people in a room, right, that, hey, let's say I am from the city of Jaipur in Rajasthan. That's where I was born. And I want the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Jaipur to get turbocharged. And if I did request you, Dan, to guide me, who are the 20 people I should get inside the room, like practically in a city, so that I can get this conversation started?
So I can give you that there's some headlines, but the devil's in the details, so to speak. Individual people who may not fit officially into the role may still play the role. So I'll give you some examples. And around the world, bankers, as much as entrepreneurs ignore bankers, they tend to anyway, because they say bankers sell you umbrellas when the sun is shining, not when it's raining. And it's raining, that's when we need the umbrella. But bankers are extremely important in any ecosystem, partly because they provide financing, but partly because of other roles that they play. Large companies, you cannot have startups without large companies. And I think Bangalore is a good example. The exit of IBM in 1979 had a huge stimulating effect on the upsurge of the BPOs in the 1970s. It's not and 1980s. It's not a coincidence that those things happened simultaneously or almost simultaneously. I've been told that the 2,000 or 3,000 customer service engineers highly trained by IBM who were left without employment after IBM exited because they had to, for the law changed, and that was a huge stimulant. The same thing happened in Israel, by the way, when a large fighter plane called the Levi, the project was canceled, $1 billion project. That was the answer to the F-15. And it was canceled in August 1987 overnight. Thousands of project managers, thousands of highly trained executives, engineers in Israel flooded the market. And they wanted to stay home. Lo and behold, 2 years later, a lot of technology companies started cropping up all over the place. That was not a coincidence. So of the 20 people, in general, you want to have people from the university, the educational sector, human capital. You want to have some public officials. You want to have some of large companies. You want to have some entrepreneurs who are interested in helping their communities. You want to have people with access to money, the financiers, and so on. They should all be in the room. But what's more important than their labels is what they do. And so you can have people that don't fit into those categories who play a hugely important role because they connect other people, they mentor, they focus resources. And I can give some individual people make a huge difference.
No, that's fantastic. I think the power of individuals in making an ecosystem happen. The examples you gave, both with IBM and the Excel, the plane example, um, almost we're coming to the end of this time, but we are like a lot of entrepreneurs have faced significant hardship during this pandemic. And a lot of them have had to shut down their enterprises. Uh, so if I were to guess from the two examples that you gave me, uh, that we should be seeing this talent possibly starting to move into newer places and newer enterprises formation, like getting started. Um, so if there were entrepreneurs sitting in the audience today uh, in this pandemic, what would be your advice to them?
Well, this is a tough one. This pandemic is really tough.
Yeah.
It's massive, and my heart goes out to all the people who have suffered
Yeah.
because of the pandemic, not just because of the health reasons, but also because of the economic reasons. Of course, both are very painful.
Yeah.
Even though I think there's a silver lining in the cloud, there's still a big cloud. Let's not ignore that fact. The pandemic has completely reshuffled the cards. And whenever that happens, of course, there are losers. There are people who will not be able to make the transition very easily. It'll be very painful. Um, and and there are winners, people who are either lucky or very skillful in identifying new market needs. When there's an upheaval like that, there are new market needs. People need different things. Societies need different things. And so, for example, there's all kinds of opportunities in healthcare. There's a lot of opportunity in remote platforms and everything related to remote platforms, the equipment, the clothing, the software, the applications that have to do with remote activity of all kinds. Flexibility in supply chains is a huge opportunity. The more flexibility you have, you see that companies with flexibility are resilient. And one of the big thing, I say, big problems that's had a huge effect on survivability and not to mention growth has been the disruption of supply chains all over the place. So that any product or service or software that can help suppliers be more flexible to flexibly redeploy their assets is going to be a huge opportunity. Anything that distributes knowledge in a new digital way is going to be a big opportunity. The ability to be physically apart yet socially together is a big opportunity. There's several of these drivers. I'm not making light of the fact that these are difficult things to do, but you have no choice. You have to adapt. Unless you're really lucky, you have to adapt, you have to change. You have to stay vigilant as well because things are going to continually change as we go on. What and people are going to have less money to spend. That's the reality. But but there are still within that huge opportunities that I'll give you one example of one of the participants in our one of our programs. He's sold soundproofing systems to restaurants. That was his specialty, and he's quite well known. A company called Mute. Well, you can imagine with the lockdown, no more restaurants, right? What do you do? Turns out that people are working from home more, and the ability to have good sound, whether it's for your home studio or for your Zoom workshops or lectures, is important. And he reoriented, didn't change basically his business, but he tweaked his business and tweaked his products so they'd be sold over Amazon. They'd be sold very cheaply. And he's put on another $1 million of revenues specifically because of the pandemic. That's a combination of luck and skill. But these shifts always create opportunities.
Yeah, super inspiring idea. And thank you so much, Dan, for such a varied conversation that started with biology and ecosystems, went down to the nuts and bolts of a business, the cash, capacity, and customers, went zoomed out completely to what does it take for a city to grow entrepreneurially to build ecosystems, and these very specific pieces of advice for what an entrepreneur could do in these difficult times, in these very, very difficult times. So, Bhairavi, I think the core construct of the ecosystems, I agree with you, is very similar between Bangalore and Ludhiana. Um, but we are at a point where women ownership of uh, of enterprises in our country is extremely low. Um, what what do you think it might take? And I know you've done a lot of work with women entrepreneurs. What do you think it might take for women in India, for women entrepreneurs in India, to grow a lot more, for there to be a lot more women venturing out in the path of entrepreneurship? So, what is that ecosystem?
Megan, women do everything less in India. I mean, we appear in the bottom 10 of women's participation in labor and workforce. Women don't own as much as men do in this country, and this is not just about India. This is a problem everywhere, right? And so what we have to really look at is that what are the different aspects that hinder women to have equal opportunity. It's kind of the problems we are trying to answer in the games Bangalore task force, for example, with the futurepreneur program and the accelerator program, saying, well, here's the deal. One of the things that women really don't have is a bunch of mentors to guide them through the process, because men find them very easily. Men find it easier to network. Women don't. And let me tell you, Bangalore's own ecosystem, even though it is the startup capital of India, is very hard for women. You don't, it's still, I mean, I always laugh and tell people that Bangalore is India's Boston, because it is really all boys club and young boys club, and they're only boys, and it's hard for women entrepreneurs. And so what we have to understand is that women need a more safe ecosystem, because men don't have to think about safety, physical safety, when they step out of the house to do business. Men don't have to take, really, unless they're really erudite, and those are exceptional cases, but they don't have to think about family care, child care, and responsibilities at home that women have to. And look at this pandemic. I mean, it's really precipitated the load on women, right? I mean, it's all great to say kids are having Zoom classes at home, but mothers have to sit. Now, if I'm an entrepreneur and my kid is having a school from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock, right, I can't run my business. And those are the banking hours. So what am I supposed to do? Right. And I think those are the kind of questions that we need to really answer, and go a step further in saying, all right, if we want to build an access to finance ecosystem for women entrepreneurs, then we will have to understand that the terms of finance will need to go beyond debt, and that we will need to bring in a lot more equity and venture finance, because women do not have collaterals to give, right? And are considered, even though they pay back so much on time, are considered riskier in terms of, because of the lack of guarantees in the system. Um, I remember when I was running my first venture, and I would interview people, and people would tell me, oh, you're just running, but your father's going to get you married. I was like, what? And then somebody would say, you're as old as my daughter. So, I can't work for you as an accountant. I had a multinational company actually tell me that your quote is the best, your solution is the best, but you're a woman, and we don't believe a woman can run logistics. I was so pissed off, pardon the French, that I went ahead and met their competitor, gave them a better solution. And I have that's the only time in my life I've gone back to a customer and said, should have picked me. Right. So I think it came because I came from an entrepreneurial background, but I think a lot of women would find it very difficult to fight back, that hindrance of societal norms. Just because you're a woman, somebody will not work with you. What do you do? Customers sometimes don't look in your eye because you're a woman. Bank officers will not meet you on time because you're a woman. And so when we understand that these are the natural societal and artificial societal barriers in place which do not encourage women to become entrepreneurs or do not support their growth as entrepreneurs, then we can start tweaking those pieces. And you know what's the best part, Mekin? When we tweak those pieces for women, we do it for everybody. Because when you create a more equity driven finance ecosystem, you also help men entrepreneurs, right? So I think we have to bear some of those things in mind.
Uh, Fantastic. Thank you, Bhairavi. Super passionate answer. I know we have a long way to go. We need to fix a ton of things, right from every household to the country, the policies, the systems that exist. But the change really has to start with each individual. So everybody there listening to Bhairavi, I think she's laid it out fairly clearly in terms of just how difficult, how challenging life is for women entrepreneurs. And if we could take initiative, both men and women, we could make things easier. So, Bhairavi, this pandemic has been devastating for a lot of people, for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of women entrepreneurs. In in all of this, have there been stories of inspiration? Have there been experiences you've had with entrepreneurs, men or women, which give you a lot of hope?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, Mekin. I honestly, there's so many.
Tell me one
Uh,
or two.
and I can tell you of this entrepreneur who he was 8. His father was killed. He's from South Kashmir. We all know that South Kashmir has a lot of terrorism problems. His entire unit, his own house got completely burned down. His passion is wood technology, and he used the pandemic to create a foldable wooden table so that children at home and homes that don't have a lot of space could have a place for children to sit and study. It's a very small example, but here's a guy who came up with a solution, right? There's an entrepreneur in Shillong who she had a difficulty in putting together her team for work. She runs a small restaurant, and so she came up with this concept of high tea and lunch boxes delivered at home for two. So she had these weekend packs delivered at home for dinner for two, with everything thrown in, beautifully packed, so that you could do dinner of two at home instead of a restaurant. And I think the creativity, the ability to say, let me do what I can, let me move the needle an inch further, and that's how growth can happen, right? And so some of these businesses, like, I have an entrepreneur in Northeast. I mean, this guy he's below 30. Okay, he's already been recognized by Forbes 30 under 30. He's 26. He started 38 companies, 38, which is, he started his 39th venture in middle of the pandemic. What was it? Well, he runs an aggregator service for taxis called Any Taxis. And so he had all these drivers who, of course, were jobless. So he came up with a version called Any on Foot, which is he repurposed all the drivers to do door deliveries, right? Because they couldn't run vehicles, and the tourist business was not there. So what I'm saying is that these are some of the stories, and if you just look everywhere, men, women, young, old entrepreneurs have tried their bit to move the little a little bit. Otherwise, India, which had no hardly any manufacturers of PPEs way back in February, would not today be the second largest manufacturer of PPEs in the world. And I think that says who and what we are capable of as a people, right? Because that speaks about our enterprise. And I know that from self-help groups to village communities to small-scale entrepreneurs to mid-sized businesses to large companies, academic institutions, entrepreneurship clubs and colleges, everybody pitched in. And I think if that's what we can do as a country in a time so difficult, I mean, look at the potential we're sitting on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bhairavi. On that inspiring note, I want to thank Bhairavi and Dan for such diverse conversations, from biology of ecosystems to getting to the nuts and bolts of cash, customers, and capacity, to talking about the challenges that women face in our country and what might it take for for us, for each one of us, to enable women entrepreneurship in our country. And finally, these inspiring stories of entrepreneurs globally and in India of what has been possible in the pandemic. Super inspiring. Thank you, Bhairavi, for joining us and for inspiring all of us.
Mekin, it's been fun and it was so cool to hear Dan. So thank you for this amazing, amazing time.